Hello, welcome to the latest episode of You Are My Boro, where we're delighted to be joined by Paul Jenkins. Paul was spent more than 2 decades at Boro. He worked through the ranks in the academy. He worked through the academy ranks as a coach. He led Boro's under-23s to a brilliant domestic treble in 2015. He went on to be part of the Boro first team coaching setup. He went on to coach at Hartlepool. He's now at Burnley. And he was once described as a legend of a man by Ben Gibson. How's that for an intro, Jenks?
Isn't it? That would it's got to be right up there, that done with intros. I've got to be honest. I'm quite humbled, actually. I'm quite humbled by it.
I haven't quite got as powerful an intro for you, unfortunately, Scott, but obviously it's great to have you along as well.
No, Ben's never called me a legend of a man. I don't think I'm going to have to accept that.
So yeah,
I think you press lads might have been called a few things like
yeah, exactly, yeah.
Thanks for joining us, Jen. As I mentioned there, you're now a technical consultant at Burnley, which is obviously the link ahead of Friday night's game. But rather than talk too much about the game, we're just going to have a chat about you in general, your career, how you ended up at Burnley, and obviously looking back at your time at Boro. It's a fair few years on now since you left Boro. How do you look back on that time in your life? Because it was such a significant portion of your life, wasn't it?
Well, it was my life, Dom. You know, I've got to be honest. It was my life. I started. I remember I was an apprentice at Darlington. I went to New York for 2 years after that, and I came back. And I think it was maybe I was 20, 21 when I first started coaching. And Brian Robson was the manager. And ironically, I've just had Viv Anderson in last week, and his son's potentially coming to Burnley as a scholar, you know, and a young pro. So, you know, I look back on it, and it was just everything that I could have wished for to help me develop as a coach at the time. I was a young coach. I had some really positive influences around me. I got the opportunity to be around the first team environment. I was working with the under 14s and 15s at the time. And, you know, I was really focused on developing myself as a coach. And, you know, along the way, you look back, and I can look back and think that I had a positive impact on a lot of young players' lives, really. And it's a pleasure to do that. 2 weeks ago, I had Stuart Downing at the training ground for half a day, and Stuart came to visit me here, and he had a look around. And, you know, I was introducing Stuart to our owners, and I said to them that Stuart was the very, very first player that somebody said to me, he will make it. And I was just a young coach. I didn't really know what it looked like, only what I'd experienced as a young player myself. Stuart was 9-year-old at the time, and Ron Bond doesn't get many wrong, does he? Because he had a few at the time, and Stuart was the first of many that came through. And I had a fantastic experience throughout my years. It was my life. And I think that the best thing I can say about it ultimately was I actually managed to represent our football club as a coach in the Premier League. And, you know, I take a great amount of pride in that, but more pride at the fact that I worked with some great people at that football club. And, you know, we developed a lot of young players who had fantastic careers in the game.
Yeah, because that's one of the things, isn't it? You know, you mentioned Stewie there, and obviously, you know, we focus on the Stewies, the David Wheaters, the James Morrisons, you know, lads who have made it at the very, very highest level. But actually, at a level slightly below that, there's a whole generation of players who have had fantastic careers within the Football League, who didn't necessarily make it at Boro, but have gone on to have fantastic football careers. That I know the club, and I imagine you take a lot of pride in that as well.
Yes, I still see, you know, John O'Grounds is playing now in low leagues, you know, Groundsy. And, you know, Groundsy was released at 15. He came back in the building a year later and you know, represented our first team. So Groundsy's one. And then you just go on, you know, Jordan Jones and Tony McMahon. And, you know, honestly, I feel terrible not even remembering that many, but there's so many young lads that just had a career, made a career out of football. And one of our aims at the time was that your objective is that of course you want to get them into your first team. That was our ultimate objective. But if they didn't make our first team, the priority was to try and actually give them a career in the game. And many young players at our football club at Middlesbrough did that at the time.
Yeah, and it's the obvious question, I know, Jenks, but who was the most talented player you worked with, and who was perhaps not the most talented, but really maximised the talent and got the best out of themselves and have kind of eked every drop of talent they've got out of themselves?
There was two lads that would spring to mind, two or three really, from a technical perspective on the eye. We take Stuart out of the equation and James Morrison, but people like Anthony Peacock was unbelievable. Young Anthony Peacock at the time, he was a tiny little thing, but what he used to do with the ball. Danny Reid, terrible injury, had to retire. Was playing for England under 17s, Danny, and it was a wonderful talent. And unfortunately, terrible knee injury. And then Jordan Jones. Ironically, we've just been texting Jordan about how bad his teeth operation's just gone, because I have to put my sunglasses on when I speak to him at the moment. He's had his teeth done and they look unbelievable. But some really, really talented young men. And then you look at the FA Youth Cup winning team, and there'll be many players in that side that may not have been blessed with the technical proficiency of them players, but however would have just absolutely gave everything and did give everything to become professional footballers and have careers in the game, and that's a really proud statement. And people who I worked with should be proud of the fact that they had some positive influence on these young lads in their careers.
And as someone who's kind of worked, within coaching setups for, more than 2 decades now and at different clubs and everything, how much is dictated by whoever's at the top? So, i.e., a manager who's prepared to give young players a chance. Because we look at Michael now, and obviously Hayden Hackney's come through kind of from nowhere and is there now strutting his stuff in the Championship, looking great. You can do so much as a coach, but to really enthuse these young lads, they've got to feel that there's a manager who is at least prepared to have a look at them, don't they?
Yeah, you'll probably hear this word a lot, and it's pathway. It's the vogue word at the moment. What's the pathway? When I'm speaking to young players, I'm speaking to parents, speaking to agents. They all want to know what the pathway is. And if you can evidence that as a football club, that's really, really important for retaining players and actually acquiring players. That you can evidence that young players are getting a chance at your football club. I think if you look back at ourselves at Burnley over recent years, Sean Dyche did a terrific job, and I don't think anybody out there could ever disagree with the job that Sean did with us. But Sean had a very, very different way of working to how Vinny works. And Sean, his philosophy and his priority at the time is we stay in the Premier League. And to do that, to stay in the Premier League, we had a lot of senior players at our football club, and when we came in, I think we had the eldest squad in the Premier League. So that was Sean's way of working, and Sean had a way that was successful for him. On the flip side to that is Vince is very, very much focused on our outcomes as a development club. Vince worked at Anderlecht for 3 years prior to coming to us, and they had a period of success developing young players. And this season we've had 3 debuts from academy players in our system, and so the message is there for us as a football club, but also the message is there for Middlesbrough. And Middlesbrough, let's be honest, throughout the Northeast, during my time and the years that I spent there, we're at the top of the game as far as academy football went. At that time, we were the people to catch without a shadow of a doubt, and we were the people to catch because players were given an opportunity. So I think it's that level of communication with the ownership, what their vision is, what they want, and it's the level of communication with the head coach to say that. Now, ultimately, you've got to have players good enough in your system, because it will fail. You know, a manager, you know, you could put a stipulation on that you've got to have 3 or 5 academy players in your squad, but if them players are not good enough and there's them rules and regs that you're still stipulating, you're going to fail. So you've got to have players good enough in your system, but you've also got to have a head coach who's confident enough and brave enough to understand and know when to put these young players in, just like Hayden Hackney at the moment.
Jenks, take you back to the Premier League season where you went in as first team coach assistant Steve Agnew. Tell us about the kind of pride you felt in obviously becoming a Premier League coach, but then equally how quickly you had to kind of forget about that and get on with the job, because hellfire, you know, was it 10 games left when you went in? Boro were up against it, weren't they? The list was a nightmare. If I remember looking back, it must have been a real balancing act for you at the time.
It was almost like, you know, it was a proud moment, don't get me wrong, and you know, I was delighted to share that with my family, you know, that I'd got that opportunity. Steve and I had worked together for many years and worked really closely off the pitch as well. So I always knew that if Steve had the chance, that I was going to go and work alongside him. The flip side to that, Don, was that you had your hands tied behind your back. It was never going to be an opportunity to actually enjoy it, because we were cut adrift. It was a difficult, you know, 10 games to go. The running was quite horrific, quite frankly. If you think about the teams we had, you know, Man United, Chelsea, Arsenal, you know, the list just went on and on and on. And we knew our backs were against the wall. There was, you know, I'm quite happy to talk about it, because I think that, you know, it was that long ago now, but there was major challenges in the dressing room. You know, we had significant, everybody's, you know, it's been well documented, that dressing room and the split, and, you know, the international players, not everybody, I'll be keen to add, but there was, you know, there was difficulties in that dressing room. And when your back's against the wall, you need absolutely everybody on the same page, trying to fight for that league position. And at the time, I can clearly say now that I don't think that everybody was in that place. Very different to my situation last season. You know, when Sean left, and, you know, we were 10 points adrift of Leeds with 10 games to go, ironically. Yeah, we just had a fantastic dressing room, to an absolute man in that dressing room, senior professionals who were prepared to do everything they can and could to support myself and Mike Jackson. And, you know, we took it to the final game of the season, and it was just one game too much for us. But two very, very different situations, and yet both brought me with, you know, immense pride. And certainly, you know, representing Middlesbrough Football Club was fantastic for me and for my family.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because, you know, Boro fans are obviously hoping that come the summer, there'll be the question for the club of, okay, how do they attack a season in the Premier League? You're almost certainly going to have that at Burnley. Let's be absolutely honest. Something's going to have to go horrendously wrong for you not to have that thing.
I'm not allowed to talk about that yet, Scott.
But it is a challenge for a club, isn't it? Because I know it's easy to look back at the benefit of hindsight, and obviously Aitor was there then, and he had his ideas about who he wanted to bring in and which way he wanted to try and do it. But I think we can all probably say that certainly the end result didn't work in terms of, you know, Boro not surviving. So it's a difficult challenge for a club, isn't it? How you attack that first season, because, you know, there's clubs that have got it right, there's clubs that have got it horribly wrong, and there's everything in between.
Yeah, I mean, look, you only need to look at Brighton and Brentford, I would say, and Fulham, you know, this season is really good examples of what you've got to do. And for ourselves, you know, I've got to be honest, I think that we all were hoping that we'd have some success and go straight back up this season, but there's no guarantee.
Yeah.
Coupled with the fact that we brought 16 new players into our squad by August. I mean, that's an incredible amount of new players bringing into a training ground, into a dressing room, into a different environment, dramatically changed the age of the squad. So you've got a lot of young players in there. And, you're trying to put all them ingredients into the cake, really, to come out with something beautiful at the end. And there's no guarantee it's going to taste right. So our challenge this season is from I guess the owner's perspective and Vinny's perspective was, what could we do to be challenging? Certainly first place wasn't. I wouldn't have said like this is absolutely the target, considering what we'd gone through. Yeah, what Vince has done and the staff have done at our football club is quite phenomenal, really. Looking at how we've dramatically changed our playing style, we've dramatically changed the first team squad, and we're sitting in a really healthy position going into tomorrow night's game. And due to barring that, the football gods could be playing their part tomorrow night, and we could actually guarantee ourselves promotion tomorrow night. And to do that in such dramatic fashion, given the changes we've made, it's a challenge. The question, Scotty, I guess, is, can you do that next season in the Premier League? Can you play the same way in the Premier League? And, the answer is pretty much, you're going to have to do something different. We've played our way out of this league this season in fantastic fashion, and credit to Vinny and Craig and Jacko, because they've instilled a different playing style, and Neil Warnock recognised that recently.
You referenced there Brighton, Brentford. I mean, the sides who have gone up and done quite well when they've gone up have tended to be footballing sides who have a brand, have a philosophy that's been built up over a fair amount of time, and have stuck to those beliefs. And from the outside looking in, it's often the teams who try and turn everything upside down and actually do away with what they've been really good at that struggle.
Yeah, I agree with Scotty, and it's almost like sticking to your beliefs, being pragmatic enough to change game by game what you need to.
Yeah.
But the bottom line in all this is your recruitment, and it's almost like doing what you've done this season really well, but actually doing the same thing with better players, because that's what you've got to have. You've got to have players who were Premier League savvy, international savvy, and that's the difference. That's the key difference in all this. And as I found out last year, that the level of player in the Premier League is just in a different level again. So it's going to be a massive challenge for any team that manages to go up this season.
Yeah.
I was going to say, how big is the gulf between the Championship and the Premier League? And you mentioned there last season, if you compare your stint in the coaching setup at Burnley at the back end of last season and your time at Boro at the back end of that season, has the standard improved again in those years between Boro's last time in the Premier League?
Definitely. The speed of the game, it's gone up another level. The intensity to the game, the standard of play, the physicality. There's so many permutations that have actually gone into improving the Premier League yet again, and it really is the speed of the game is on a different level again. And you think about the Premier League. The Premier League's probably three leagues in itself. You've got your top six, you've got your mid group, and then you've got your bottom group. And actually, this season it's probably two leagues, because 11 down over, 12 down over, they could be getting relegated. That's how tight this league is. I think the aim of some clubs, and certainly somebody like a Norwich, for example, their aim would be to be a top 22 club. So they're actually prepared to be relegated, but also prepared to go straight back up. and they will be building their football club accordingly from that financial perspective. For us, we don't want that. If we're fortunate enough to get promoted this season, without speaking too soon, our challenge and our aim will be that we want to be in that top half of the table, because that's where our club can be sustainable. And our plan is that due to the recruitment restrictions through Brexit, we're looking to expand our organisation to help aid the recruitment. So when I talk about staying in the Premier League, Scotty, it's about your recruitment as well as anything.
And so you've obviously, had the opportunity to work at close quarters with Kompany this season. And I mean, clearly it's a pretty easy, lazy journalist kind of parallels to draw. But I mean, there are clearly parallels between him and Michael Carrick in terms of the fact that, they've been hugely successful players, embarking on a coaching career. They both had a degree of experience before the job that they're in, but obviously this is their first job in English football. Potentially, fingers crossed, they might both end up going up together come the end of the season. I mean, we were speaking to Tony Mowbray the other week, and he was saying, look, I've only seen them for one season, but I've already seen enough in both of them to know that you've got there two absolute top-class coaches who, at some point in the future, will be successors in the Premier League. I mean, he was pretty adamant on that. I mean, you obviously have much more experience of Vincent than you do with Michael, but do you already kind of sense that from the pair of them?
Of course, you can't do what you've done by being an average coach and an average human being. These guys have been at the top of their profession as players, and already, I know Vincent's got 3-4 years ahead of Michael as a first team coach, head coach. But if you look at it, you can't do what Michael Carrick's done from where the position at Middlesbrough were in and be pretty bang average. The guy's got something, and I speak to Jonathan quite often, and we speak every week, and Jonathan just can't speak highly enough of Michael, and Woody's just thoroughly enjoying working alongside Michael. So I've not come across Michael myself personally, but observing week in and week out the transition they've made since since Chris left, I think he needs to be commended. Vince is exactly the same. I quite often you can watch us and you could probably put Man City shirts on us and understand the influence of what Pep has had on Vince. And I'm not saying Vince is a replica. Vince has got his own way that he wants to operate. Yet clearly, what Pep did and the influence Pep had on him as a player has transitioned into Vince as a coach. And without doubt, both of these guys will be coaching in the Premier League. Nobody needs to convince me of that. I'm sure of it. Michael's getting a lot of attention now. Obviously, West Ham situation, and given the history with them, Tottenham as well. And I'm not going to talk about the interest in Vinny because I don't want to, because we want to keep him at our football club.
Offbeat, you, before we get into kind of how you ended up at Burnley, talk to us about your time at Hartlepool United, because that was completely different. You went from trying to help Boro survive on the pitch to trying to help Hartlepool survive off it as a National League coach. It just taps into you. You must have this kind of feeling of thinking, I've seen it all as a coach, or not just as a coach, but involved in football.
Absolutely. There's not many things, Dom, that I've not experienced, and I've gone from I went from working with Premier League international footballers, players of your Negredos, the Damas of this world, Ben Gibson, with England internationals, just top international footballers at a football club which was very stable, to the National League and 2 months into my tenure at Hartlepool as assistant manager. Craig Harrison and I recall we were walking onto the training pitch one morning, and I remember I left Middlesbrough, and within me and the wife and kids, we were planning on going to the United States to see our family. 48 hours later, I'm starting back at Hartlepool again, and the holiday was put on hold, as per usual in our.
I bet the missus was chuffed a bit, was she?
Delighted. She's probably delighted to get me out of the house more than anything. And I remember it was late September. Craig and I were walking across a training pitch, and he tapped me on the shoulder and he went, "Oh, Jenks, just quick word." I was like, "Yeah." He says, "Look, I'm not sure we're going to get paid this month." And I looked at him. I went, "What do you mean?" I'd had 23 years where I never even even entered my head that I wasn't going to get paid. And he says, "Yeah, the owners could be a bit tight on wages this month." And I was like, "All right, okay." Anyway, we got paid that month. Next month, I had to defer my wages. And we went through an unofficial transfer embargo. And I remember saying to the chairwoman at the time, Pam, I was like, "Can you just explain to me what an unofficial transfer? You either have a transfer embargo or you don't. It can't be an unofficial." And then we went into the issues with the league. The league were aware of some financial difficulties that we were going through, and people are worried, asking us about why we're not bringing players in, and we had lads who were injured and we couldn't bring anybody in, and nobody knew any of this. So to the outside world, it was like all rosy in the garden as far as the club's finances go. We'd had a terrible start. We didn't enjoy any success, and then went 13 games unbeaten, and we were doing all right. And then November comes, the players were paid late. December comes, there's no wages, and you just got yourself on a really good footing where we were top half of the table and we were in distance of the playoff positions, and then that happened, and then the owner pulls out, the club's about to go into administration. We're trying to just keep everybody focused. Craig loses his job, and I'm just I've said to everybody, I'd never ever say that it was a bad experience at Hartlepool. It was an experience, and that was it. And it was an experience. It was just a total different level of football, and I think that I learned so much from that. I really did, and so wherever I've been, whether it was Middlesbrough, whether it was Hartlepool or Burnley, and the fact that how I came to Burnley, it's just been a wonderful footballing life for me, and a wonderful vocation.
Just very quickly on pools, because I remember coming over at the training ground when you were there. Mm-hmm. Is it Nathan Porritt? Have I got that name right? Yeah. So he was Kitman, wasn't he, when I came over? Now, he'd been kind of the next big thing at Boro for years, hasn't he? I guess you'll have seen him come.
Honestly, Dom, it was. I still use Nathan as an example to young footballers, and how at 16-year-old, Pos was, like you say, the next best thing. He featured on the Panorama BBC program.
I remember,
Peter Harrison. Yeah. And, he took him down to Tottenham behind our backs, and, thinking we didn't know about it, and we knew all about it because Kev Scott used to play at Tottenham, and someone had rang him and said, "We've got one of your lads down here," and Posh should have been at training with us, and he was down at Tottenham enjoying the delights of the city. And then Posh played for England, and so from England under 15s, 16s, 17s, and 2 years later he's driving a taxi, and 2 years after that he's kitman at Hartlepool, and could have equally, actually, he was that good, he could have played for the first team. He was that talented. Even then, Pos was a talent, So some really, really weird experiences at Hartlepool, Dom, that's for sure.
Yeah, and so obviously now Burnley, and we said we wouldn't reflect too much on this weekend, but we're going to have to throw it in there, aren't we? Back on Teesside. It's It's gonna be an interesting night for lots of different reasons, isn't it? But yeah, I mean, obviously the first thing is you'll obviously have more than half an eye on what Luton are doing in the afternoon, won't you? Because like you say, potentially that sets up a real night for you.
No, I'm not interested in them. We've just got to do our job.
Oh, hey, true. You've been watching like the Carrick press conferences.
Of course, yeah. I think I'll have both eyes on that game, Scotty. Don't worry about that.
Yeah.
And then it's going to be I would hope it's going to be a fantastic experience for everybody, you know, and a great game for all. We've got two sides there that are really at the top of their game at the moment, and you know, for me personally, it'll be a strange time. I've been back to the football club a few times. It was lovely to host Neil and the staff at our place, and I'm looking forward to going back and just looking forward to going to the footy really and enjoying the match.
Tell us what's your role at Burnley then now, Jenks? Tell us about that and kind of how you ended up going there.
Yeah, so it was probably about 2.5 years ago now. I was introduced to Alan Pace and the guys at ALK who were in the process of buying Burnley. And at the time, they were looking for somebody with Premier League experience, somebody with academy experience, somebody with a pro license and the qualification that they could have within their organisation, just to be almost like a translator, really, and a communicator and the conduit between the ownership and the football club to help them with their transition of buying it. And so, you know, for the next 6 months, we met on a number of occasions, spoke about, you know, what their future was for the football club at Burnley, what their plans were. It was really exciting. And, you know, the long-term strategy of developing a multi-club operation. And we concluded the deal on the 31st of December, and you know, 2.5 years later, it's been a really fantastic experience for me. You know, I've worked with the recruitment side, I've stepped in and supported the women, clearly doing a lot of work with the academy, and at the moment, you know, we're looking at how we can expand our football club to help with our recruitment strategy, which is to try and build a potentially a multi-club operation.
And just before we wrap up, just want to ask you about a few individuals looking back at your time at Boro, players who you've worked with. Dale Fry, firstly, because obviously you helped bring him through, and he's gone on to become a Boro first team part of the furniture, really. And Harry Chapman, because I remember Harry Chapman. Were you there when he scored the goal? The goal in the
UEFA? The goal.
Yeah, the goal. Yeah. UEFA Youth League or whatever it was called.
Yeah.
He's another one. He's at Bradford now, isn't he? There's a right Boro collective there, isn't there? With Richie Smallwood and.
There is, yeah, because we've got one of our lads on loan there, so Dara Costello. So I said to Dara, you know, don't ever worry. I said the Boro posse are there; they'll
look after you.
Yeah, so you've got all, you know. But Dale was just a fantastic example to any young player of dedication. Dale used to turn up at the sports hall at 4:30. You know, we weren't training until 5:30, but you would guarantee as soon as he came home from school, he was putting his kit on, and his dad was driving him up to the training ground, and he would be there by himself, pinging balls in the gym, you know, just kicking a ball around for a good half hour before everybody else, and that just carried on all the way through. And you know, there was no surprise that Dale ended up, you know, playing in our first team. You know, around that group, Chappie was just an unbelievable talent. I remember you saying it at the time. And he could make things happen. You know, Chappie's biggest challenge was himself, really, and you know that the psychological side of the game for him. Then you look at Tavern. You know, Marcus is playing in the Premier League now with Bournemouth. You know, there was a good, healthy group of young players there. And, you know, I've just been out to Florida on business with the football club. And while I was out there, I popped over to see Seb Hines. You know, Seb was just a a top class human being and a real good servant to our football club as well. And Seb's head coach at Orlando Pride now for the women. And, that's another one I look back and these lads are just, it makes me proud to know, sit and have a chat with Seb, and he spoke about, our time together and how much he loved it. And, to be able to be there for somebody like Seb is really important for me, just like somebody like Stuart Downing who came in to see me. So, honestly, the list goes on and on and on. And I've just, I would apologise to all the lads who I haven't mentioned. I know we spoke about Gibbo. I just loved working with Gibbo. Gibbo was, from 9-10-year-old, was 2 or 3 years ahead of himself, such a mature young man. And, he could hold a conversation even at that age. And you always knew that Ben's pathway was going to be a real positive one. Just some great players, young men, and also some fantastic staff that I worked with at Middlesbrough.
Well, we can't put you on the spot for a prediction. We wouldn't do that. But let's just say that hopefully we can have this chat next season ahead of Burnley Boro in the Premier League. Both sat nicely mid-table. That would do, wouldn't it?
I'll take that, as long as we win the championship.
I remember one more, Jen, because I remember last time I spoke to you, you said that Nigel Clough had told you to get a dog because he said when you're a manager, it's the only time, or a coach or involved in football, it's the only time you get to yourself when you get out and take the dog for a walk. So did you take him up on the advice? Did you get a dog? You were thinking about it at the time.
I've got 2 dogs and 12 play carp. I went one better.
Well, thanks so much for your time, mate.
Brilliant. It's been lovely. Yeah, thanks, mate.
Brilliant. Anytime. Good to speak to you.
The classic good luck for the rest of the season, but not on Friday night and all that.
Yeah.
And hopefully
I might see you tomorrow anyway.
Enjoy it. Yeah, enjoy it.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jensen. Best of luck for the rest of the season. Thank you.
Cheers.